What's up, everyone? Greetings and salutations. So we are meant to be having a conversation with Malcolm Nance, a recurring guest on the show, but he hasn't replied to my messages, just double checking that we're on. Well, hopefully he'll join us. But yeah, I wanted to get into the latest around Iran because I made a video, well, stream. Yeah, it was a stream. Can't remember what I'm posting these days. There's so much going on. But we made a video relatively recently this week about the developments, and I sort of was putting my arguments forward about why I don't necessarily cover it as obsessively, one could argue, as I was earlier on in the conflict. And that's because sort of when I take a step back, I look at a lot of people, specifically those who look at the military side and the explosions and the tactical shifts and sort of Malcolm's not going to be joining us. He's just told us that that he's driving and behind schedule. He's in Normandy, so I didn't get a heads up about that, so I guess we'll have to keep this stream shorter. It's happened before, which is unfortunate. So bit frustrating, I won't lie. Okay, so so as I said, I was saying that the situation changes often. There's been another explosion here, another strike there, and in all of the noise about it, I feel that the forest gets lost for the trees, in that this doesn't necessarily change the strategic outlook of the situation. However, I do think that may have changed, ironically, of course. Sod's law, Murphy's law, as soon as you say one thing, the opposite happens, or something sort of an opposing side happens, which is that there is strong evidence to suggest that the Houthis, the terrorist group, the militia group in Yemen, is going to be entering this conflict. Now, this is something that's been on the sort of minds of people, the precipice, for a long time. Would this other proxy in Iran's complex proxy network get involved? Now, the Houthis and the Iranians, IRGC, have a rather unique relationship. It's not exactly the same as the Hezbollah or the Iraqi militia groups, but they have a slightly different ideological agenda and materialistic motivations. But certainly they've been seen as an effective cell group that the Iranians could call up when they so wished. And this was the expectation, that they would be called up earlier on in the conflict. Indeed, if you go back through some of my live streams, we had a guest, Fatima, who was very good, an expert on the Houthis, explaining why the Houthis may not respond to such calls, and the fact that they have a pretty limited stockpile, they have a pretty limited arsenal, and therefore if they do get involved, it's on a quite selective basis, and why the only occasion where they did respond or activate, as some people call it, was in April, so a while back, and that was literally only shooting one missile towards Israel, which was easily intercepted by the Iron Dome. So the biggest development of this, according to a Reuters article that came out a couple of days ago, is that the Houthis may well be being activated, quote unquote, by the IRGC to start putting pressure on the Gulf of Aden. Now, there was separate news that Al Jazeera reported, which I saw about lunchtime today, saying that a ship had been boarded by some sort of military personnel. It was incredibly unclear of who it was or what it was. And then subsequent information coming out that it was actually Somalian pirates, not the Houthis. Now, the Houthis are a lot more kitted out than some Somalians with machine guns, but this demonstrates that the maritime security outside of the Strait of Hormuz is going to start becoming more and more of a issue. And as I asked Ryan Macbeth yesterday, which some of you probably saw, does the United States have the capacity to operate within two distinct theaters at the same time? Now, he says that they can. Others argue that they can't. But clearly, the focus on the Strait of Hormuz is going to potentially be distracted upon with greater emphasis on the Gulf of Aden, the Horn of Africa, and the channel of water that passes between there and Yemen. Now, the Houthis are quite well kitted out in terms of maritime disruption. They're more than just sort of some pirate-esque types. And certainly that is not something that requires as much of a depletion of their missile stockpile, something that they have, as I say, demonstrated their reluctance to do so, not necessarily complete opposition to do so, but a reluctance to do too much of. So that is quite a big deal. If that happens, which I'm still on the fence about, I'm not entirely sure that the Houthis are. I think it's absurd to say that the Houthis are simply activated or deactivated by Tehran. It gives little to no agency to the Houthis, who, again, whilst being a proxy, have demonstrated quite a lot of autonomy in the way that Hamas certainly haven't. They've been very active before the IRGC started leveraging them more and more in the past few years. And they have a distinct ideological or command and control structure versus that of Iran. Now, of course, as they've become a pain in the side, a thorn in the side of the Saudis and the Emiratis especially, in the past few years, there has been a growing sort of desire by Iran to prop them up, to help them as a way to just undermine the interests and be a disruptor to the Saudis, obviously. But is it enough to say that they will simply act whenever called upon by the Iranians, the IRGC? I'm not so sure. Certainly, if that were to happen, then that would mean incredible disruption to maritime security. But of course, obviously, global trade. The Gulf of Aden is the mouthpiece to the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and so a lot of other areas of trade, let alone the diversions that a lot of the Gulf states have made in terms of shifting their production lines away from the Strait of Hormuz to that part of the region, to the part of the Middle East, to avoid the war. So if they then are being disrupted down by the Gulf of Aden, then that means they are going to have to either find an alternative route or simply transport all that oil up through the Suez Canal, around the Mediterranean, and then down the Gulf, the coast of Africa, which is obviously completely insane if you're trying to supply your demand, your customers, your clients, your consumers in the Asian markets. In Europe, it's perhaps not as much of a problem, but this will be a disproportionate setback for Asian economies, for India, for China, for other major economies down there that rely heavily on the fossil fuels produced by the Gulf states for their domestic needs, consumption, and interest, etc. So I think one of the main things to focus on these next few days is the Gulf of Aden. Are we going to see intensified activities down there? Are the Americans going to respond to that? Is this just a sort of brief flashpoint, or is it going to become a sustained operational theater, a problematic place? That's the one thing that I would say. The other thing I wanted to touch upon was, of course, the growing threats by the IRGC about, let me just say, so anyway, is the growing threats by Tehran over critical infrastructure, civilian infrastructure being hit. Now, this is a red line that the Iranians had made very clear, that if the United States started striking what it considers to be civilian infrastructure, it would, all bets are off. All bets are off over what it starts targeting in terms of desalination plants and other critical infrastructure on the Gulf states, things that are critical for the day-to-day lives of civilians, people. It wouldn't just be about US bases. Right now, the Iranians are arguing, and I think the evidence shows, satellite imagery shows, that they have largely been focusing on just American bases within certain countries. Specifically, Kuwait and Bahrain have been the primary targets, but this refreshed round of military activity since the MOU essentially collapsed is, and actually, mind you, everyone, just on a happy anniversary, everybody. 1 month's anniversary to the MOU being signed and, of course, failing. So that's, if you've got a cup of tea, you've got a glass of wine, then raise in great cheer and adulation for Donald Trump and the best ever peacemaking president you can imagine, the best ever. And of course, everyone, yes, do like the video. It really helps. It's very easy to do, but means a lot and really means, because I do enjoy these live streams, but they never perform quite as well as they should, unfortunately. So if you can tap the like button, that would be very much appreciated. If you want to comment something down below, or if you want to subscribe, if you're new, then of course that's appreciated. But still, anyway, so this is the 1 month anniversary. Despite all of that, Donald Trump is pressing ahead with these strikes, and these new strikes are a real red line for the IRGC, not something that they can accept sitting down. They've warned that all infrastructure in the region will be crushed under steel blows if the US carries out or continues to carry out threats to Iran's civilian sites. Now, there was debate whether or not the Americans had crossed this red line earlier on in the month, early on in the year, in that they struck a dam. Some of you may remember that, an important dam that supplied water and energy, because I think it was partially a hydroelectric dam, to 20,000 people. Not a small group, not a small number that you could just turn your nose up. And I was reading one brief commentary from someone we've had on the show before, Nicole Grudjuski. She's an Iranian-Russian nuclear expert, and she was sort of saying or arguing that the Americans have essentially shifted away from trying to play down their sort of violations of international law to sort of just screw it. We're just doing it quite blatantly at this point. We're just going to do it as much as we can, or we just want to try and cause as much setbacks and destruction to the Iranians, to the Iranian people, like sort of the effort to distinguish between the Iranian people and the regime and military targets, or the regime, the government, and those targets versus just anything of a civilian nature, have been completely thrown out the window. The US is not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes anymore about its desire or desperation to make an impact, to have an impact on this war. So yeah, it is. It's pretty bad. It's pretty risky what the Americans are doing right now. They've expanded strikes into northern Iran and disabled various ships attempting to run this blockade. That was just yesterday, whilst the House Republicans in the US unveiled a $95 billion package covering the Iran war, and also a couple of other things, farm aid and elections. But crucially, there was a massive blowback to Trump in the past few days in the, shall we say, legislative aspects, rejecting his desire to sort of take the war the next stage. And I think that demonstrates that Trump does not have a control of this situation. Both hands are firmly not on the steering wheel. They're just making it up. Let's be honest. There is not a strategy involved here. I don't really understand what the Trump administration or Trump himself is expecting to achieve at this rate. They're flailing around looking for ways to pressure the Iranians into sort of faltering or floundering, and they're not doing that. The Iranians remain very sort of settled and quite coherent in their strategy, which essentially is just allow the United States to overreach. I think more of the Iranian strategy isn't really a strategy of proaction, if that makes sense, or sort of action. It is simply reacting, not in a sort of impulsive sense, but simply the US makes the first move and the Iranians just respond in kind, proportional moves. The Americans make that initial gambit to quote the name of the show, they take that initial gambit, they put themselves at risk by putting themselves out there, and then it is rejected or it fails, and therefore quite adequately and substantially shoved off or responded to in kind by the Iranians. The Iranians are not making the initial risky move or gambit, worrying about the potential blowback from the Americans. This seems very much like an impulsive strategy led by a obviously incredibly pissed off Donald Trump and a enraged sort of Hegseth. Not all of them in the government are completely off their kilter, but if you just read the news, the headlines, the Donald Trump held a several hour long security cabinet meeting, whatever the administrative meeting, discussing potential military options. Now, for what it's worth, apparently his preference is a ground operation is still off the cards, but instead of other options, which would be targeting or occupying certain areas of Iranian islands or targeting certain a specific tunnel, which has yet been something to Peak Vision or something. I forget the name of it exactly. I'll look it up in a second. But the point is, we've reverted to even humoring the idea that a ground operation is possible. Trump is this impulsive, this short-termist in his in a desire for a result, that he is considering ground operations again. Where Kharg Island is back on the cards. Everything is back on the cards, apparently. Let me see there. Let me find the name of this particular site. Yeah, hidden nuclear fortress, Pickaxe Mountain. The name is Pickaxe Mountain. I knew there was an axe in there somewhere. I wasn't particularly aware of the exact pickaxe. Yeah, basically this is Pickaxe Mountain was a nuclear fortress that is carved over 100 meters into hard granite. And Trump, but a lot of experts who, frankly, I'm more inclined to believe than the Trump administration, believe bunker busters, even those incredible missiles, projectiles, whatever, that the United States has, would not be enough to deal sufficient enough damage to this thing. Now, the United States has bombed southern Iran for several consecutive nights at this point, 6, I think at this point. They've hit radar posts, missile sites, IRGC speedboats, and the ports and islands that line the Strait of Hormuz. But he intends to try to strike this vast, half-built granite fortress, some people are basically calling it, in central Iran, that Western officials believe hold the most closely guarded pieces of the country's nuclear program. But many people, as I say, don't believe it is a... well, the United States does not have the capabilities. Now, Trump said on Monday, quote, "We're going to take out Pickaxe Mountain. Tell the Iranians to be ready. Let them know we're coming, okay? There's not a damn thing they can do about it." The confidence of a man without a plan. Now, this site is about 90 miles south of the Fordow enrichment plant, and only 5 minutes. It's a lovely jaunty ride, actually, everyone. Just grab a cabaret or convertible and just take the scenic. It's very scenic, actually. You can stop for some good Instagram photos along there. I've had, and they even have a fantastic cafe de bomb, I've heard, is what it's called. But yeah, only minutes away from Natanz nuclear complex in Isfahan province. So point is that the United States, or if the Trump administration doesn't think that Pickaxe Mountain has not been reinforced, dug further, in some way, shape, or form dealt with to a sufficient extent to ensure that if and when the United States felt like targeting it after they struck Natanz and Fordow just up the road, they're out of their mind. Obviously, the United States wasn't doing anything in this time. It was just sitting around. Iran was just sitting around doing F-all, and nothing's going to happen. So anyway, this is the other main development here. You have these ordnance penetrators, these bunker masters, the GBU-57, which is a 30,000 pound buster developed specifically to reach sites such as Fordo, and so roughly 60 meters into the earth. But against granite, which is a formidable rock in geological terms, that is a depth of more than 100 meters. It will not get there. They don't have the capacity to reach it. You can, and they didn't really even do that bigger damage to Fordow. They damaged a lot of the tunnels. They made the I think it was the walkways, the access points, the tunnel access ways, whatever. They did a lot of damage on those, but the actual facility itself, which is about 295 feet underground, they didn't do enough damage to that because the maximum depth of a bunker buster is about 200 feet. So Pickaxe facility is about 330 feet. This is not enough. And so the United States is again chatting absolute shit. Donald Trump is chatting shit, trying to use bravado and hot air chest pounding to get the capitulation or fear from the Iranians, which one would think after he's done it for the best part of 4 months. I thought the guy gets bored, but he doesn't seem to get bored, and maybe he does actually have quite a good endurance, Trump, because he seems to be enjoying doing the same old shit every day and not getting bored of it, or not coming to learn that it's not working. So maybe the guy does actually have really good patience, and we just completely mislabeled him. But yeah, that's one of the main other developments here. But this all leads me to, I think, one of the biggest concerns, which is that the desalination plants that are being threaded. Kuwait said about 2-3 hours ago, I saw in one update that the desalination plant in Kuwait was attacked from Iran. Now, it's not clear whether Iran intended it directly, but the country's Ministry of Electricity, Water, and Renewable Energy basically said on Friday the attack damaged the facility, sparked the fire, and affected several electricity generation units. Now, it said the emergency plans were activated immediately to contain the impact of the incidents, and the blaze was soon under control. But the point is that the Iranians were saying that they were doing a targeting of a US military base in Kuwait as part of the 12th wave of what it described as retaliatory operations. So this is the problem. Even if the IRGC isn't intending to go after desalination plants or critical infrastructure of Gulf states, this is going to be a knock-on effect. It's going to be a collateral damage. And the collateral damage of this could then lead to actual intended damage. If the Iranians start targeting desalination plants, that is something that the Gulf states cannot stand. They cannot withstand that, because that is their entire basic economies are dependent on the ability to desalinate or soil water and have drinking water. It's not like Saudi Arabia is known for its tropical springs and rainfall in the tropical seasons. So Iran has this other potential Achilles heel, this disproportionate thing that it can pull out to threaten the Americans with vis-a-vis their or through their third-party countries that have been caught in the middle of all of this. So I wonder about whether or not the Iranians might start actually acting on these unfortunate spillover attacks. So it's something to keep in mind. Things are moving rapidly, and obviously the situation with the markets is looking pretty volatile. Oil's been volatile. But I think the worst thing is not necessarily that oil goes up and stays up at a sustained price, but that it goes up, goes down It's that continued perpetual instability, the perpetual volatility that I think is worse. Oil rose by 13% this week alone, and barrels could reach upwards of $100 again. So it's this continuous back and forth between these two. As I said yesterday or the day before on another stream, it's an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. Both sides are unwilling to back down. The escalation ladder is just forever increasing. And it's essentially, and also to quote someone else that I was listening to, it's just, and I think it sums it up, and is what I've been meaning to call it, but forgot the adage. It's just a game of chicken. Both sides want to play the game of chicken. The only difference is that one side is in a more favorable place because they don't have the political pressure at home. And the geography means that this is all happening within areas, so the distance is not as much of a problem for them. Of course, it's a damage for their destruction, but ultimately, if they could still function as a system, then it doesn't really matter. But if the United States is having to carry out a war that is pretty far away, and the growing resentments among other countries because of the impact on their cost of living, general economic outlook is looking damaged, I'm talking about Europe here, then they may restrict American activities access to their bases, which ultimately undermines the Americans to conduct their campaigns as effectively. I'm not a military analyst, but just look at this geopolitically, or more specifically geostrategically, let alone the geoeconomics of it, and you understand that the time horizon for this is, I think, a lot worse for the United States than it is for Iran. You can't bomb. We had Ryan Macbeth on, and whilst he didn't say it in quite this blunt way, some of you noted in the comments that he's sort of essentially saying you can bomb your way out of the problem. I don't agree. I don't think you can bomb your way out of the problem. I think you can only deepen the animosity towards you, pragmatically, materialistically undermine your own security standpoint, and ultimately not really get anywhere. These two are not going to, this war is not going to be won by sort of the collapse of the Iranian government. That is not happening. It is not ever going to happen. There are not enough moving parts here. There are not enough disproportionate pressure points that the Americans can levy against the Iranians in a way that the Iranians can levy against the Americans. They just have to outlast. It's the same strategy. And if they do activate the Houthis in some way, shape, or form, that is not something that the Americans are going to have an effective answer for. So we'll have to see. But guys, that was meant to be a conversation with Malcolm Nance, but wasn't. It turned into a conversation with Pyotr Kurzin and Peter Curzon, my English counterpart here, my Jekyll and Hyde. So yeah. No, absolutely. Closing the Red Sea will make oil go through the roof, and that's what the Iranians are betting on. That is not a gamble. That is not a situation, a scenario that the Americans can just talk their way through, or Trump can threaten his way out of. It will be impossible. But of course, the question is, would the Israelis start with the maybe hypothetically, because of the Houthis closer to Israel, would the Israelis, maybe Trump would turn to Israel, turn to Netanyahu and say, look, you deal with the Houthis, we'll deal with Iran, and maybe that sort of that is the trigger point that brings the Israelis and Americans back on better terms, and Netanyahu gets exactly what he wants. We'll have to see, but certainly it's all to play for, and that's an update for me. I am supposed to be hosting someone else in a bit, but they too are having scheduling issues, despite me scheduling this sort of 2 or 3 days in advance. Yeah, I don't know how some other channels do it, to be honest. Yeah, it's frustrating. You try to plan something and then it falls through, or yeah, it's so I hope those of you watching, appreciate it is quite challenging running a YouTube channel. Trying to run a show largely on my own. It's a one-man show largely over here. Trying to schedule people, and then they don't make the timings, or they have another commitment or something else comes up. I understand people have lives, but yeah, it's a bit frustrating because you schedule it and then you sort of like, oh, we'll cancel it. Sorry, everyone. Or you then do it and then they don't turn up, and then you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll just talk for half an hour and sort of try to make it work. But yeah, anyway, guys, that's what I would say is the reality of the situation for now. Strategically, I don't think anything is changing right now. The big picture is not shifting unless the Houthis get involved, unless the Iranians start really targeting much more persistently or purposefully these sites, desalination plants or other infrastructure, which would really make it untenable for the Gulf states, or because Trump has a heart attack or something like that. But anyway, thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. Do subscribe, obviously. Please do share the videos. I want to try and grow the channel much faster. And I've been having some reflections on the show that I need to be a lot more shameless, direct about asking you to like the video and subscribe. So please do that. It's fun doing it, but it's also challenging. And the thing about me is I travel whilst I also do these shows and streamlines, and trying to balance it all together, which is it's a bit of a headache. I've been having a little bit of you can probably hear I'm a bit under the weather. So I sometimes think I overwork myself trying to do everything at once, or try to do everything myself. But that's because I'm passionate about it and I want to do as good a job for you guys, and as well also for myself, because I enjoy this and it's something that I've always wanted to do. So anyway, not sob story, just a reality of the situation. So yeah, if you're willing to support me, then I do really appreciate it, and I do read most of the comments, and you'll see me sometimes fired up replying to some of the ones that I don't like, but most of the ones that I do like. Anyway, guys, we'll speak soon. Have a good afternoon, weekend if I don't speak to you before. Ciao.